King, your career and family's longevity in racing is truly remarkable. What does this milestone, 75 years, mean to you?
Means I'm old. You know, I guess it's sort of a deal that we look back and say, okay, we was here when it all started, when NASCAR first started, the first Cup Series racing, and we've seen all the changes ever since they first started. I know the first 2 or 3 races we went to, we went in a family car, or we went in a race car, drove it to the racetrack. When it was over, we drove home. That's how much things have changed. And we've seen all those changes over the years. And we've done it from the family standpoint. My dad started the thing. I come along, Kyle come along, Adam come along, and my brother, you know, he was there, Dale Inman, cousin. It's been a family affair. And the deal was, I was the one that was out front. They, from a standpoint that all I did was drive the race car. Some worked on it some, but it's all the people that we had around us that made it work. So I've never done anything by myself. I've always had somebody pushing me, making me do things. So it's just been a long road, and it's been very successful for the Petty family.
What were you feeling when you saw that first King's hat unveiled out there?
Made me get the big head, okay, because the hat's pretty big. But you know, I think it's really a neat deal from the standpoint that it'll be at all the tracks. Fans, Petty fans, other fans, all NASCAR fans can get the picture took with it, and you know, it just, from my standpoint, it just continues to hook me up that much more with NASCAR.
And Kyle, you've talked a lot about what the fans mean to the Petty family. What does it mean to share this with all the fans over the past 75 years?
So, you know, it's really cool because when you look at it, the design that's on the hat that's out here is, you know, it's pictures of my Uncle Maurice. It's my granddad. It's Adam. It's myself. It's all of us. And I think you've got to. It's pretty cool when we sat down and we realized that this year was our 75th. That, you know, NASCAR was formed in '48, ran the first race. Granddaddy was there. That it was, you know, he was 12, 13 years old when they were in that first race. So it's pretty cool that you've got a guy that's still around that was 12 or 13 years old when they went to Darlington for the first time, when my granddad won his championships and stuff, and my dad came along. So you've got that history in our family. At the same time, you know, there's guys that have had an impact on the sport, from Jake Elder, who went to work at Petty Enterprises, or from my granddad and them in '60, '61 when I was born, that went on to win championships with Dale Earnhardt, Steve Mill, Tony Glover, Adam Stevens that's out there right now. All these guys come through Petty Enterprises. So what Petty Enterprises and the organization has meant to the sport as you look out, it's not just us, but it's really cool to think that as a family, and that's what we look at it is, and I've said it a million times to everybody in this room. We grew up in rural North Carolina, in a rural community where there were farmers, and there were lots of farmers that were 3rd and 4th generation farms. We just happened to raise race cars on our farms. And my dad followed my granddad, and I followed him, and Adam came along, and you know, it's just what we always did and what we always knew, and we were very, very blessed to be in a sport and to be able to grow with the sport through the years. And you know, this, to be able to do this, and I said it out there, is, and I think a lot of guys in here already know this, but you know, as we looked at the Petty family, and you look at that one thing, then the hat, the sunglasses, that stands out. That stands out more than anything else, and that represents what we've done and what he's done and what our family has done. But I said it out there. I said, you know, I look at him, and I hope some of you guys, again, realize it, that he's 86, will be 87 this year. And if he had never driven a race car, he would still be that guy that had bought a ticket to the Daytona 500 every year since 1959, because he's just a race fan. And I think that in a nutshell is what our family is too. We've just always been race fans. So you you can put yourself in that position to say, man, what a great sport and what a great thing to be in. And we're fortunate and very blessed to be here for this many years.
If you drove the family car down, it was the same car that was in the race. What was plan B in case that car ever got in a wreck?
We never had nothing but plan A. There was no plan B.
And also, how many times in your career did you do, were convertibles mixed in with the regular cars? And just what was that like? Because that'd have to be fairly intimidating to be out there in a convertible.
What happened in I've turned 21 in July of 58, and I wanted to start driving. So, but they didn't want two cars in the same race because we couldn't make the same money, okay? And he said, you go run the convertibles, and I'll run the hardtops. And then there was a few races that we ran together. And then even in 59, there was a bunch of two race deals, convertibles and hardtops. In fact, the first race at Daytona had convertibles and hardtops. And so that kind of ended the convertibles, especially on the big tracks. But, nobody really realized it. I guess they did realize it, but didn't think that much about it. Of course, hardtops run like 12, 14 mile an hour faster than the convertibles did. So, but anyhow, after 59, then I started doing the cup stuff. So, but really, the first win I ever had was in a convertible in 1959 at Columbia, South Carolina. But that's not counted in because all my stuff is cup stuff. And really, if you look at it, a lot of people don't think that I run that many hardtop races in 59. It was really 1960s when my career really started and got going.
Go ahead, Jacob.
Jacob Seelman, Raceface Digital. One, I guess, really for both of you, and then I'll follow up with Richard. Richard, you won the race 7 times, the 500. Of those 7, and Kyle, you can maybe chime in on this as well, which one to you was the most memorable?
The ones I lost, okay? Like 67, 76 with Pearson, that thing really sticks. And I guess I probably remembered as much about that race the fans do as all the 7 that I won. And probably out of the 7 races that we won, we probably should have won maybe 4 of them. 3 of them, somebody else had trouble and stuff. But on the other hand, there's probably 3 or 4 we should have won, but we had trouble. So we was lucky enough to run enough races over a period of time to be able to kind of even that out.
Yeah, for me, watching his wins, then 79 is the one that stands out. And I think we had, there were moments, if we go back to, and we'll go back to 61 when my granddad wrecked here. And a lot of people forget that he went over the wall in turns 1 during the first race, and then my granddad went over the wall in the second race. But basically, my dad and my Uncle Maurice and those guys went back to Level Cross, North Carolina, busted, broke, out of business. And that was it, because they had no cars, they had nothing. And my granddad was down here in the hospital, and my grandmother was living in a motel, waiting for my grandfather. So 79 was the same kind of thing in a little bit different way, because come off a really bad year in 78. And a lot of people don't remember until you see the photo, but it didn't have STP all over that car. Had Southern Pride car wash down the side of it. Had STP on it, and it was painted red and blue, but it was not a true STP car to win that race. And the way that race won, and the way it was, we had fewer people working at the race shop because we'd cut our budget. Steve Mill, Richie Bars, put that Oldsmobile body on there, and we did it. And it's one of the first cars I was fortunate enough to be able to work on and help them build. So I took a lot of pride in working on your dad's car and it coming and winning the Daytona 500, no matter how it won. But if you go back to it, I think that race in a lot of ways, epitomized what Petty Enterprise was, and that they never gave up. You just kept digging. When the sponsor money wasn't exactly what it should be, when the car wasn't the fastest car, you ran every lap until it was over, because it's not over until they throw the checkered flag. And that day was a huge day for our family and for our business.
And real quickly, Richard, what's it mean just to see the tribute scheme on Jimmy's car this week as he tries to get back in the 500?
I think that's a big deal. It's a Petty blue car, and I think I won a couple of races with a Petty blue car down here, so we're looking forward to seeing what's it. But just a tribute back to legacy is bringing in what legacy is. Just a name. If it's got to have a legacy. It's got to have something behind it. So they decided to sort of bring some of our past back to legacy, which I thought they should have done before.
We're going to go to Mark, and then Dan, then Ben and Stephen.
Mark Garrow, PRN. Kyle, you grow up and it's the family deal to race. So you're a little kid, you're kind of watching this as you grow. When did you begin to realize it was a bigger deal than you understood to begin with, and your dad was a bigger deal than you first understood?
Yeah, and you know what? Probably older. I've joked about it, but I was serious. I was in elementary school before I realized everybody's dad didn't have a race car, because pretty much everybody I knew, their dad had a race car. You know, that's kind of the way it was. But I don't think I realized until, and I remember we went to Greenville Pickens and took Dennis MacArthur with me, friend of mine, and he was just blown away with the race cars. And Jabe Thomas let me wax his race car. Richard Petty wouldn't let me touch his race car, but Jabe Thomas let me wax his race car and hang out with him. But the thing was, then you realize that your friends thought your dad was a pretty cool deal and a pretty big deal. And I think it was not that I ever realized it, but it's that the way people acted towards him, and the way people acted in restaurants, and you would walk in. I mean, you know, we just grew up where when you'd sit down in a restaurant to eat, 80% of the people would be staring at you. And you're always like, what, I got some in my teeth, what's up, you know? And they were so polite, because they would wait until he got through eating, and then they would come over and ask for an autograph. But it was just, and I know that sounds weird, but it was your normal. You know what I mean? So I think it just kind of evolved into that, where you realized that what he did was a little bit different, and what we did as a family was a little bit different.
We're going to go to Dan, and then Ben.
Hi, Richard. You mentioned how nice it is that Jimmy's going to pay tribute to you on the car. I'm wondering how you feel now at Legacy. Last year when you were here, you seemed a little hurt over how things were going with the team and with Jimmy. How's the relationship changed, if at all, over the past year?
Remember, every question that's asked, you don't have to answer.
What's the question?
Did you hear him? He said last year he thought you were a little uneasy with where Legacy was. Are you okay with it now?
Well, I'm a little bit better, especially once they painted the car blue. Okay.
That blue color hides a lot, bud.
No, I guess basically everything was so new when we had the conference here last year. You know what I mean? And there's been a lot of questions answered since then. So I think I've got a little bit more comfortable with it. It's not like what I'd like to see it, but from my standpoint, it's a lot better. On my end of it anyway.
We're going to go to Ben, and then Stephen.
Ben White with the Fayetteville Observer. Actually got two quick ones. Okay, you won 200 races, and this is probably the millionth time you've been asked this, but I'm going to ask it again. You won against David Pearson, Bobby Allison, Buddy Baker, Cale Yarborough, Benny Parsons. What does it mean to you personally to have won 200 races against the greatest stock car drivers in the world? What does it mean to you?
You know, it just happened, okay? Yeah. I just happened to be there at the same time they was, or they happened to be at the same time I was. I wasn't there with with Earnhardt's or Gordon's, Jimmy Johnson. You mean, so how would I have fared against them, or how would they have fared against me? But if you look at the people you just brought out, those people won more races than these people ever going to go to, put it together. And they did it in a 12, 15-year period. And so NASCAR started off, and it had Lee Petty, Fireball Roberts, had a few guys. Okay, they carried it along for 10 or 12 years. And I've said this before. Then me and Pearson, Allison's, Bakers, all them guys, we came along and we carried it for a while. Okay, then Earnhardt comes along, he carries it for a while. Jeff Gordon carries it for a while. Jimmy Johnson carries it for a while. We're looking for somebody to carry it. Mm-hmm. And right now we don't have anybody.
Gotcha.
That's my personal opinion on that. We've got some good candidates, but nobody's broke out and got themselves just a little bit better than anybody else. Everybody's pretty even now. So from one standpoint, it's good. From another standpoint, it's always good to have a fox out in front for the hounds to all run for.
Gotcha. Okay, second question real quick. 1979, everybody's asked Donnie and Cale before he passed away what went through their mind when they're at the bottom of turn 3 after they crashed, but nobody's really asked you what went through your mind when you looked up and said, holy cow, they're at the bottom of turn 3. So what went through your mind in 79 when suddenly you're in the lead and you're going to win the Daytona 500? What went through
I
your
had to
mind?
worry about Darrell, okay,
Yeah.
because Darrell, myself, and Fort was a little behind. We was running for third place, and all of a sudden I get to the third corner, and I'm running for first place. But I didn't run any harder for first place than I would for third place. And it just happened that we was in the right place at the right time under the right circumstances. But I don't think I didn't think about winning the race as much as I thought about beating Darrell. I had to be the first of that crowd. And so happens that it was number 1 instead of number 3.
We're going to go to Stephen and Steve.
Stephen Toronto, CBS Sports. I'll pose this question to both of you because, Kyle, you mentioned at the beginning, you referenced Randleman. And when I got the opportunity to visit Randleman years ago, I could really get a sense of how much Petty Enterprises and the Petty family in general contributed to and built up the community. Can you talk a bit about how the rise of Petty Enterprises and all that your family has done in the community built up the community from what it was to what it is now?
Randleman was a mill town. The city itself is a mill town, and the surrounding area is farm community, and it still is today, and to a large degree. The mills have gone away, as they have in a lot of southern towns, but it's still community, and I think that's the deal. And I've said it a million times: is there's what he did and what our family did put the name Randleman on the map in a lot of ways, because it's just a crossroads. It's just a small town, but at the same time, it's that place that we go back to, that he goes back to, and you've heard me say it, where he's Richard, not Richard Petty, he's Richard, and I'm Kyle. And that was Lee, and that was Elizabeth, and that was Maurice, and that was Adam. That's just your name. Nobody referred to you as your double name, as your last name, And you walk out through there, and they scream Richard Petty, you know what I mean? Or they scream your name, but they just call you by your first name because you went to school with them, and they went to school. He went to school with their parents. I went to school with the kids. So that's part of it. And I don't think we ever looked at it. We were just part of the community. And I think the community looked at us the same way. I don't think they ever looked at us. They thought we were weird because we had race cars, because they did other stuff. But it's not that you didn't fit in, because that's where you always went home to. We've said it a million times. You travel all over the world and all over the country, but there's no place like going back to Randolph County and Randleman, North Carolina, because that's where you're from, and that's where you're always going to be from. And when it's all over with, that's where they're sort of going to put us in the ground at, because that's who we are, and I think that's the thing that for us, and as we talked out there with the fans and stuff, that's the community we live in. This was the community we worked in, with all those guys in the garage area, with all the NASCAR officials, with all you guys in the press, that was always here. That was the community. We just went from level cross to inside a fenced-in area, inside a racetrack somewhere in Martinsville, Virginia, or Daytona Beach, Florida, or Bristol, Tennessee, and then you went back to your regular community. So I don't think he ever looked at it, or we ever looked at it, that we just grew up in that community. That's who we were.
That's it. Thank you, guys.
We'll go to Steve, and then Mike and Dustin.
Steve Schweitzer with the Lasco Press. And maybe you can both comment on this. I came here for the first time in 1973. You parked in the dirt and the grass out front. You walked up to a shack to buy your ticket. You walked through a chain link fence to get inside to climb up the grandstand and take a seat and watch the race. And if you go out front today, obviously, you know, an awful lot has happened here. Do you remember the first time that you came to the track and what your impression, you know, was? Two different generations there. Just curious how that appeared to you.
Yeah, the first time we came down here, 1959, we came through the tunnel, had the pickup truck, had a race car on a trailer behind us, and went through the tunnel, and it was just nothing in the infield. I mean, there was a lake out there, but you couldn't see it. But the number 1 and 2 corner looked like a wall, but it looked like it was 2 or 3 miles away. I mean, it was just over impressive, I guess. We'd seen Darlington, but we grew up around Darlington, so Darlington was just a bigger racetrack than what we'd been. We came here, it was just a whole different world. And you got to figure, when you come out of town, you came into a swamp, and there was a racetrack. There was nothing out here. I mean, it's a 2-lane road out front, and there was no buildings, none of this stuff that was out here in the day. Like you said, you've seen it grow up. You know what I mean? We've seen it grow up from 1959. And from that standpoint, when Daytona was built, then it opened this whole part of the country up as far as new businesses coming this way, drain the swamp and all that. So it wasn't Trump drained the swamp, it was Francis. They drained this swamp. So, you know, the things that we've seen change since 1959 is more than you've seen, because we were here for the very first race. And, you know, they didn't even have a garage area. We parked out. It rained one night, and we had to come out and get our tools, wipe them all off because everything was wet. But it was better than anything we'd ever seen before. So we took it as being the number 1. And it's just like now, you come down here now and you come back in 10 years, it's going to be so much different, you're not going to recognize it.
Yeah, I think for me, you know, they came here in -- I was born in '60 and started coming here. And if for not many of you, probably none, where they used to be where halfway where the start-finish line is in the infield was a scorer's stand. And that's where they scored. And my grandmother and my mom would score. And it was a 4-sided scoreboard. If you've ever seen old pictures of it, it's a 4-sided scoreboard where it would go around. And under the 4-sided scoreboard was a playground with some swing sets and a sliding board and some stuff. And all the wives would dump the kids under the scoreboard. And that's where we were. And one of them would come down and bring us some sandwiches or get us a Coke, and they'd leave us in there. And as soon as the race was over, they'd come out and gather us up, and we'd go to the car, and then we'd head back to the hotel, then we'd go home. And, you know, I thought it was the coolest place in the world, racetrack with a playground. You know what I mean? Couldn't be anything cooler than that. And it had a beach, too, and an ocean. Every racetrack didn't have that. So that was our little world when we didn't know whether it was a big track or a little track or whatever when you're 5, 6, 7 years old. The longer you were around it, then you begin to understand what Daytona was and what Daytona meant to the sport. And, you know, he and I did a thing not long ago for NASCAR. And it's you know, Daytona kind of ushered in the speedway era of the sport because then you had Atlanta and you had Charlotte and you had over the next 8 or 10 years, speedways that were built, not short track speedways that were built. And it was 30 years later before they came back and they started building Texas and Kansas and all that. So it was just a phase in the sport when the sport really took off. So it has changed. It has changed drastically, and it will continue to change. And we had a conversation with Jim today. We were talking to him, and I was in Vegas a couple weeks ago for the week before the Super Bowl when everybody was at the Coliseum, and I was giving a speech, and I spoke about how NASCAR has always been, and the sport has always been, able to shift and change and be whatever it needed to be at that time, whether it was the 50s, whether it was the 60s, with the manufacturers, whether it was the 70s, when you had the fuel crisis and R.J. Reynolds came into the sport, whether you had the 80s or 90s. And as I'm giving this speech, NASCAR announces, hey, we're going to run this race on Saturday night because it's going to rain on Sunday. And they're willing to shift and willing to move and make the sport whatever it needed to be at that time. And I think that's what, as he speaks about this place, what we see today, you probably won't recognize in 10 or 15 years because they have done and continue to do, whether it's with this car, with whatever, it just continues to be whatever it needs to be relevant and to be successful. And I think that's a tribute to not only the competitors, but the people in the front office and the fans for sticking with it, and for you guys for still caring about it and writing about it and telling people about it.
Go up front to Mike and then to Dustin.
Richard, as far as I know, you were not born with a cowboy hat on. Do you remember when that started?
Right here,
See, he points at me.
1978, 79,
Probably,
somewhere along there.
Yeah, early.
He had
When we started the boot business.
Linda had a little business down there, antique business. Kyle come in one day and said, I want to start selling boots down here. So she gave him a corner, and it was Kyle Petty Boot Barn. And Charlie One Horse guy come by and trying to get Kyle to start selling hats. And Kyle said, I guess he didn't jump on him right quick. And he said, well, I'll give you one. And he said, well, maybe my daddy will wear it.
Yeah.
So they gave me one of the hats, and I loved them. So we've been working with Charlie One Horse all these years. So that basically, that's where the hat started. I think I'd wear, from time to time before, I'd wear a cowboy hat, but it was just something you'd pick up. It wasn't nothing special. But once I got these, then the same model. Every one of them's different, but they're basically the same thing.
75 years for the Petties. Can Thad take it to 100?
We don't know yet. Okay. He's been back and forth. He's run all kinds of different deals. This is the first year that he's going to be able to run a full circuit with one kind of car. I mean, last year he was in 3 or 4 different cars, in sports cars, modifieds. I mean, and so he's never really settled down in one place. Hopefully this year with the truck deal, then we're going to find out, and he's going to find out if he's a race car driver or whether he's going to have to go to work for a living.
Go to Dustin, and then we'll wrap up with Jerry and Deb.
Dustin Long, NBC Sports. Richard, for all the talk of all your wins, what did it mean to see your son win races, like here in '79 in the ARCA race and all his other victories?
You know, it was probably more enthused about him winning than me, because by the time he came along, I'd won a bunch of races. So it wasn't just a regular deal. It was special to win races, don't get me wrong. But when you got a son coming along and he wins races, then that's really special. And I guess the first Cup race he won was in Richmond, Virginia, and he was running along there 5th or 6th. and Earnhardt and them, they all crash. He winds up winning the race. And so we got a picture of me in the car. My dad won a race up there, and I'm sitting in the car. Okay, then I come along, I win races. Then I had a son to come along, win at the same racetrack. That made it, even though it was his first Cup race, it was very, very special for us to all three generations won at the same racetrack.
You know, I don't think you think about it at that time. You know, I don't think I thought about it until after Adam come. And it's so funny, you know, I am, because, you know, I didn't win a lot of races, but I won a few races. And I will be asked a lot, what are the most important races, your biggest wins? And my biggest win was 79 when he won here, because I felt like I had built that car. I felt like that was the first car they let me weld on. That was the first car they let me put inner panels in. That's the first car they let me do things with. I'd done things before, but you were 17, 18 years old, and you helped Richie and Steve build that car. That win, and then Adam winning that ARCA race at Charlotte. Those are the two greatest wins that I'll ever experience in my whole life. I could have won this race 20 times, and those still two would rank more, because the guy I love as a dad and as a hero, to help him win something, and then to come along and be able to help your son win something and do something too. Those are big moments in my life, really big moments. So, you know, I never thought about me until Adam, and I will say that.
Jerry Jordan, KickingTheTires.net. I don't know if you know how many cowboy hats you've ever had or worn. Do you? Do you?
No, not really. I usually keep 12 or 15 around, you know. So you wear them a while, and I'll autograph them, and we give them away for auctions and stuff, for charity deals. So there's been hundreds of them, I know that.
I will say this: everybody in our family has a grandfather clock from Martinsville and a cowboy hat from Richard Petty. Okay, so just do the math on that.
So there's 28 of these statue hats that are going to be scattered around at NASCAR tracks. How much input do you get on what they're going to look like? And have you seen?
Well, no, the way it is, I think the hats come plain, and then each racetrack puts their special stuff on it. I mean, when we come back here for July the 4th, this one here, July.
Yeah, the July race in October.
Yeah, they change it. But anyhow, for the summer race, then it'll be wrapped different. It'll look a little bit different. Okay. So every race and every hat will be a little bit different, because they are advertising their racetrack. Yeah. They're not advertising Richard Petty. You know what I mean? They're using that hat to advertise themselves with. Yeah. So it helps me and it helps them.
Yeah. It's pretty cool, because you know, when we go to Martinsville, there'll be photos of him in Martinsville Victory Lane, Granddaddy winning at Martinsville. That when we go to Bristol, it'll be the same thing. When you go to Talladega, it'll be the same type thing. So it's all, and it's whether it's the spring race or the fall race or the summer race, whatever it may be. So the racetracks have really gotten behind it. Russell Branham helped do this one and did a great job picking the photos and doing the stuff. And it's pretty cool. It was really cool. Knew what was coming, but when you see it, it's just different. It's just cool.
I'm going to wrap up with Deb.
Okay. Deb Williams, Auto Week. Kind of back to what you were talking about earlier about community and growing up there. Richard, Kyle, the Petty family has always been community service oriented, giving back to the community. When you had the fan club days, you raised money for the ball fields and what was needed there. Victory Junctions on Petty family land. At Richard, you were a county commissioner. Linda was on the Board of Education. Where does that all come from, to the belief and teaching to give back to the community?
It just happened. You know what I mean? I think probably he sat around and got to thinking, look how fortunate I was to be able to go and make a little bit of money from time to time, and then come back and be able to help people in the community. And it was just something that I think probably Linda Gill, my wife, was probably one that pushed us to get started in the thing. And it's just been a family tradition that we're so much fortunate than a lot of people around us. Especially Randolph County is probably the cheapest county in North Carolina. And but it's not only in the county. We try to help a lot of different ways. We got the Petty Foundation. I mean, we do a lot of stuff with Paralyzed Veterans of America. Just whatever comes in front of us. I mean, the hats and stuff we'll give away for a heart foundation, do one for an eye foundation, kidney foundation, whatever. But it's something that we can give and do and help somebody that it just makes you feel good, okay? And, it's one of the deals that I always felt like if I give away enough stuff, somebody will give me some stuff too. And that's the good Lord seen fit for that.
Yeah, and honestly, I think, and I said it before, it just comes from the community. It comes from growing up in that community. It comes from, where my dad lives now, there was a gentleman who lived across the road, Mr. Evans. Mr. Evans had the only hay baler in our part of the county. And Mr. Evans would bale everybody's hay. He just came out and baled everybody's hay. Whether it was my Uncle Bottles, any farmer that was around, he just baled your hay. And that's what they did. When a barn burnt down, everybody got together and built a barn. We had go back to the race shop, and he'll tell you, there were countless farmers and guys would bring their plows, would bring their tractors, just up to be worked on, because he couldn't take them anywhere. So we'd weld them up or put them back together and help them do stuff, trade a motor, build a motor for a pickup, whatever it took. But that's the community you grew in. You grew up in. You helped each other. You helped your neighbor. So it's just always been with Grandmother Patty, with my grandmother Owens, my mom's mother, with the churches that we went to, the Methodist church there in Level Cross and then Randleman. It was just being a part of a community because you helped each other. And like I said before, our community just extended to here. And I've said it when we built a camp and when Adam's accident happened. You didn't realize how big your community was until you realized that your community was in this garage area, but it encompassed the fans too. And that community reached out and gave us something. They gave us something back with Victory Junction. They gave these kids something back. So it's just always been a part of who our family was to try to help other people. And when Adam's accident happened, it came back 10 million fold, and continues to this day. So that just feeds that spirit to give more.
Well, Kyle and Richard, thanks so much for sharing all of your stories here tonight, and we can't wait to see each of these installations as we travel around the country this year.
Thank you. And I know y'all just had us here for a long time because qualifying's not until 8 o'clock, and y'all are killing time. But thank you, guys. Thank you for having us tonight.
I want to thank all y'all people for making the Petty family part of y'all's business, but making racing as big as what it is.
Yeah, for sure.
Without the press, TV, and all that stuff, we'd still be working on them plows, I guess. So thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You have a good week.